Good evening, friends. I want to thank the museum, Mr. Mukherjee, the Museum Society, Firoza Godrej, all my friends from the museum, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me here this evening. It is indeed an honor, always a pleasure to come to the museum, and indeed an honor to be invited to present the 10th Vimal Shah Memorial Lecture. I appraised myself about Srimati Vimal Shah very briefly and understood that she was passionately involved in urban conservation. My talk today, of course, has got nothing to do with urban conservation, but it's got a lot to do with preservation, conservation, and documentation. So I think it fits in with the kind of work she did and what she was so passionate about. Now, as Nilanjana already told you all, today's lecture is drawn from my intensive research in Minakari, which led to my curation of a permanent gallery in Jaipur, which is dedicated to the art of enameling on jewelry. The museum itself in Jaipur is an initiative of the House of Sunita Shekhawat, very, very well-known brand in India. The gallery weaves together the rich legacy of Minakari Enamelling in India, celebrating its enduring beauty and the hands that shaped its history. The gallery is scheduled, we are really working very frantically, and I hope that the gallery will open to the public early October. Even as I talk, everything is getting printed and installation is ongoing. Now on to my talk this evening. In India, enamel is called Meena. The term is perhaps derived from the Persian term Meena, meaning spiritual and heavenly. It's a metaphor for the recreation of the Garden of Paradise, filled with all kinds of beautiful flower blossoms, meandering vines, birds, parrots, and peacocks. The process of enameling is therefore called Minakari. Meena from referring to the enamel, and Kari, of course, meaning manufacture. Now, in the early 16th century, India encountered the art of enameling with its array of colors, elegant forms, and precision of workmanship from Europe. So this evening, I'm going to take you all through that journey. Where did it come from, and what happened, and how was this art form transformed in India? Now, after its arrival in India, within a few decades, enameling became one of the most characteristic and highly evolved techniques of goldsmithing in the Mughal period. It was used to adorn jewelry, weapons, vessels, and even thrones. You can see an array of objects on the screen in front of you. The art form was mastered, reinterpreted, and distinctively expressed by the Indian goldsmith, giving Indian jewelry an identity that is even today unique in the world. Now, before proceeding further, I thought it would be appropriate to introduce you all to the different kinds of enameling. So first we have cloisonné. The term cloisonné comes from the French cloison, meaning partition. It is a technique wherein the various sections of the design are separated by thin metal wires or strips known as cloisons, and the enamel is retained within this area. When the surface is ground, the wires appear as though they were inlaid into the enamel. The technique is most notably associated on the left of the screen with the early Byzantine period, and on the right with Chinese enameling. Then we have champlevé, from the French word meaning raised field. It is a technique in which the surface of the metal is actually carved away, is gouged away to create troughs. The cavities are filled with enamel paste that fuses into the cell when the object is fired. The technique of cloisonné flourished in centers in medieval Europe, particularly in Germany, Spain, France, Italy, and England. Now, champlevé became the mainstay of Indian enameling, and it endures even today. Then we have basse taille. Basse-taille, also from the French, meaning shallow cut, is a technique that consists of hollow cavities, as in champ-levé, but the bottom of the depression is engraved with designs. You can see the designs that is coming through the translucent enamel. The engraved designs actually reflect light through the enamel, creating an almost three-dimensional effect. And I hope that you all can see that on the two objects on the screen. The technique actually developed in Siena in Italy, not far from the city of Florence, and in Limoges in France. The next technique is known as émail en rond bosse, a technique of coating miniature sculptural forms with opaque or translucent enamel. It was used extensively in Europe, especially for small pendants like the horse pendant that you see on the left side of your screen. In India, not so popular, the technique is mostly associated in the manufacture of the bird thura, a kind of turban ornament. Then we have plica jour, a French term that means letting in the daylight. It's open-work transparent enamel made up of a network of wires in which the gaps are spanned by translucent enamel. You can see the light filtering through. It almost appears like stained glass. The technique was discovered in the 15th century by the famous Italian goldsmith Benvenuto Cellini and is most famously associated with the French jeweler René Lalique. Two of his most famous and outstanding examples are on the screen. Interestingly, if you all might have noticed, all these enamel techniques have French names, indicating their provenance or development in France in the Middle Ages. And finally, there is painted enamel, wherein enamel colors are painted with a fine brush on a base that is enameled usually in white, on a white base. Painted enamels originated in Limoges in France. It traveled to Persia and then arrived in India, where it is today or in the past was associated solely with the city of Benares, where it was known as Gulabi Meena. Now, briefly, the history of enameling. While the early history and development of the art of enameling is really not the subject today, but I needed to place it in context, enameling was known in Egypt during the New Kingdom, that is about the 11th, 12th century BCE. On the left of the screen is a pectoral, a pendant in the form of a vulture. The piece was discovered on the chest of the mummy of King Tutankhamun. In this piece from antiquity, there appears to be an early attempt at enameling, and you can see all the blue areas. Glass was melted into the cells. And on the right is a ring. It's one of 6 rings discovered in a Mycenaean tomb in Cyprus, dated to the 11th century BCE. The rings themselves are made of chased gold, ornamented with twisted wires. The technique here, you can see the white areas. The technique is cloisonné, wherein the curved gold cloisons or cells were filled with opaque white glass fragments and then fired. The fused glass melted and settled into the cells. Now, from the 3rd century BC to the Hellenistic period, enamel jewelry was produced throughout the Greek Empire. Interestingly, Greek craftsmen and Greek jewelry crafting techniques and designs traveled with Alexander the Great on his campaign to India, when it is commonly believed that the techniques of filigree and granulation were introduced to Indian craftsmen, both techniques that endure till today in Indian jewelry manufacture. Now, in India, the earliest evidence of enameling appears among the jewels that were discovered in the ruins of Sirkap, adjacent to the ancient city of Takshashila. It lay on the ancient Silk Route. Importantly, it was through Takshashila that Alexander marched to India in 326 BC. And in the 2nd century BC, Sirkap was occupied by the Indo-Greek kingdom of Bactria. Look at the 2 necklaces on the screen. The one on the top, and I've shown a detail on the right side, the one on the top is inlaid with a light blue material, whereas the one at the bottom with a white material. It was originally identified as feldspar, which is a kind of a mineral, but is now believed to be a kind of enamel. Unfortunately, there are just very few examples, and there is no evidence to suggest that unlike filigree and granulation, enameling endured in India in the subsequent centuries for almost 1,000 years. The art form is not mentioned in any of the treatises on gemology or texts with chapters devoted to precious gems and jewelry, the Ratna Pariksha, Kautilya's Arthashastra, the Brihatta Samhita, the Agastya-mata. All these are texts that address gemology, but no mention of enamel. In fact, to date, the earliest mention of enameling occurs only in the late 16th century in Abul Fazl's Aini-Akbari, Institutes of Akbar. In Europe, too, there was a long lull. The art form only emerged again in the 10th century, and I said earlier, in Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul, Constantinople. And during the Middle Ages, from about the 12th century, the art of enamel had an immense resurgence, fueled by the demand for elaborate church ornaments, sumptuous reliquaries, and crosses, like the examples that you see on the screen. Enameling centers sprang up in Germany, in Italy, in France, and in Spain. The techniques of painted and champ-levé enamel was perfected and predominated. By the 13th and 14th century, the art form traveled to China, where cloisonné became very popular. Now in India, enameling arrived in India through two main routes. You can see it on top, a northern land route that connected Europe, passing through Persia to Lahore, Delhi, and Agra, and a southern sea route connecting Europe, that is Portugal, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, and so on, to Goa and the Deccan, and thereon to Hyderabad, Lucknow, and the Mughal ateliers in different parts of India. Importantly, it was not a one-time entry, but almost continuous through the 16th and 17th century. Now, the cross-cultural mobility of gemstones, jewelry, paintings, decorative works of art, luxury goods, and engraved pattern goods reached new heights in the 16th and 17th centuries. This is a striking example, and it serves to illustrate this point. The painting, it's a detail of a painting, dates to about 1620. It's from the St. Petersburg album. It features the Mughal Emperor Jahangir with the Persian ruler Shah. But look at all the objects that are featured in the painting. First, the black pedestal table with gold work, a kind of a marquetry work, on which the two rulers are seated, is either English or Italian. The ewer on the table and the two large vessels are most likely Italian. And if you look on the side, I've kind of juxtaposed them with pieces from Italy from the same period to show you the forms that came to India. There are two objects between the ewers, a transparent wine glass that looks Venetian and a small red glazed teacup that appears to be Chinese. And you can see two examples at the bottom. The two brass objects on the left and on the right appear to be liturgical objects, probably Portuguese. And the black trays containing fruit at the bottom are probably made of Japanese lacquer. Look at Khan Alam, the chief falconer at the Mughal court standing on the right. He holds a German automaton of Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt. And you can see an example on the right side, which is today in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And look up on the top right, the array of cameo rings on Jahangir's fingers are probably either from England or was perhaps made in India by a European craftsman. These objects, all of them exogenous to the Mughal court, most likely arrived through a variety of channels. What were these channels? Diplomatic, mercantile, and of course with religious missionaries. Interestingly, in fact, the two large Italian vessels also appear to be enameled. They're probably glass enamel. Thus, between the occupation of Goa by the Portuguese in 1510 and the establishment of the Mughal karkhanas in the 1570s, the circulation of objects such as gemstones, paintings, and luxury goods from Europe resulted in intercultural encounters that produced hybrid works of art, drawing upon elements from two or more different artistic cultures. A few more examples. This kind of intercultural exchange occurred across all genres of art, as well as in both directions, from Europe to India and from India to Europe. Mughal illuminated manuscripts or murakkas were brought to Europe by merchants, traders, and company officials, where Western painters in turn copied them. On the left side of your screen, the painting of Shah Jahan by the Mughal artist Bichittar, dating to about 1630-1640, appears to have served as the model for the Dutch master Rembrandt's drawing on the right. And those of you who saw the exhibition right here in the museum some years ago will immediately see the connection. And on the right side of the screen is a 17th century carved emerald on top, which depicts a female figure seated on a pedestal throne, offering a bunch of grapes to a male child seated in her lap. Below the throne, there is an antelope and a cow. Perhaps the scene depicts Radha and Krishna, but the inspiration for the tableau probably lies in paintings such as the one below, the Madonna and the Child of the Grapes, by the 17th century Italian artist Pierre Mignard. But while the theme is European, the stylistic characteristics of the image, the kundan set ruby tree on the emerald with a bird, as well as the animals below, are typically Indian. The art of Minakari Enamelling was the result of such encounters. Influences came from all over Europe, such as Spain and Portugal, England, France, Germany, etc., all centers of the Renaissance and areas with close contact with India at that time. Now, in 1614, the East India Company sent a gift of the finest Jacobean portrait miniatures to Jahangir. Look at the portrait on the screen. It's actually very tiny. It measures just 4 centimeters by about 5 centimeters. And you can see the full page of the manuscript on the top, and you'll see in relation to the size of the page, the size of the portrait miniature. It is believed to have been copied by a Mughal artist from one of those English miniatures that came to Jahangir's court. The subject is a gentleman dressed in fashionable English attire. Of particular interest to us today is his necklace. It comprises intricately designed links set with diamonds and decorated with red, green, white, and black enamel, suspending a prancing horse pendant, also set with gems and enameled. Now, given the minute size of the miniature and the remarkable accuracy with which the jewels are depicted, it is my view that most likely the artist had actual examples to draw from. This assumption is supported by pieces that you see on the right side of the screen, the necklace on top made in Germany or Spain, whereas the horse pendant below, made in Spain, both of them dates to about 1600. Such images serve as compelling evidence that Renaissance jewelry was available and circulating in India during that era. Notably, the figure, if you look again at the portrait, the figure's upper arms are adorned with Indian-style bazubands or armbands, showcasing a harmonious blend of cultural elements. Now, in 1615, Sir Thomas Roe, English ambassador from the court of King James I, arrived at the Mughal court of Jahangir. In his diary, Roe mentions presenting the emperor with a little crystal box crafted to resemble a ruby, intricately carved with designs and entirely enameled. Roe's gift might bear a resemblance to the gold box at the bottom of on the right side of the screen. The box is enameled in vibrant red. Its sides are decorated with enamel flowers and leaves. The striking red color and abundant floral motifs have become hallmarks of Indian enamel. It is also recorded in Rose's diary that Jahangir was so impressed with his gift that he summoned his craftsmen and instructed them to master the technique behind its creation, an obvious reference to learn the art of enameling. In the detailed close-up on the left, Jahangir is seen wearing a cameo pendant. You can see it around his neck, set within an enameled frame. It is reminiscent of the one shown below. The cameo pendant made in England features a bust of Queen Elizabeth I, framed in white enamel and set with table-cut rubies. Now, the custom of wearing a miniature jeweled portrait of the sovereign, given as a mark of special favor, was initiated by Queen Elizabeth I. And it's likely that Thomas Roe, honoring this custom, perhaps wore a pendant of his own sovereign that became a model for the artists of Jahangir's court to copy. In the painting on the right, Shah Jahan is portrayed holding a pendant that features a miniature portrait of himself, and you can see the detail on the right. The portrait is set within an enameled gold frame, not like the example that is shown below, a cameo bust of Minerva, framed with a border of flowers enameled in red, green, blue, and white. Actually, in India, such jewels were known as shast. They took inspiration from the hat badges or ensigns that became widely popular in 16th century Europe. During Shah Jahan's reign, these became very fashionable, and they were either pinned to turbans or worn as pendants, and there are many miniature paintings that attest to this. So such artifacts served as exemplars for the Mughal imperial craftsmen, inspiring them in their own creations. Now, we must remember that jewelry was highly portable. Jewels were personal items. They were carried as memento mori, as charms for good luck, and could be easily liquidated to cash. Jewels served as stock in trade for gem merchants, for traders and other visitors hoping to make quick money. Items such as those on the screen, there were pendants, crosses, amulets, pictures of family members in enamel frames, and other decorative items were likely transported to India. These jewels were splendid vehicles for the art of enameling. As you can see, each one of these is beautifully enameled, and they served as prototypes for the Indian goldsmith. What was the color palette? There was manganese purple, cobalt blue, turquoise, green, yellow, orange, pink, brown, a deep garnet red. Now, beyond tangible jewels, the influence was further cemented through illustrated books, artworks, and the presence of European master jewelers and lapidaries in the Indian courts. As early as 1518, Raulu Shantim, the son of a Goan jeweler, traveled to Lisbon, where he learned local techniques and produced jewels for the king Manuel I. 1518, 8 years before Babur even set foot in India. And in 1545, Catherine of Austria dispatched her goldsmith, Diogo Vaz, to Goa to acquire fabulous gemstones and undertake jewelry commissions. As a result, techniques and traditions would surely have been shared, exchanged, and merged. Now let us do a comparison. Comparisons with European items clearly indicate that type after type of enamel of this period can be seen to be based directly on one or more of the highly developed schools of enameling of Europe. The connection between Europe and India is particularly evident, not so much in design and motifs, but in the shared color palette. This range, as I said, encompassed a wide range of colors. And you can see the palette distinctly showcased in the European objects on the left. Now look at the objects on the right. It's a collection set of 17th century archery rings, all from the Deccan. The correlation between European and Deccan styles becomes immediately evident. The same color, it's reflecting the same color palette. Select colors from this palette spread to Lucknow, where it endured in the enamelers' repertoire in the 18th and 19th centuries, which we will see shortly. However, it's important to note that while the Champ-Levé technique, painted enamelling, and the early color scheme might have roots in European tradition, the Indian artisan ingeniously integrated these elements, creating what is a uniquely Indian aesthetic. Yet another example we see in this French spoon on the left. It dates to the late 16th and early 17th century. It features a miniature portrait in the bowl, painted in white and black enamel. And on the right is yet another archery ring from the same period, the 17th century, perhaps inspired by the European model. The ring is Indian, the form is Indian, Persian Indian, but it displays a woman wearing European attire, but she's playing an Indian veena and flanked by deer. The composition is artfully rendered in white, powder blue, light green, gray, and black enamel outlined in black. While the green foliage, you can see the bright green foliage is crafted in the Champ-Levé technique. Now, the medieval Jaipur staff, seen here in the middle, is dated to around 1560. It is widely considered the earliest Indian enamel artifact, 1560. It measures 52 inches. This crutch-shaped staff features a jade handle set with gemstones. Its extended length, 52 inches, was designed for courtiers to lean on during prolonged standing sessions in the emperor's presence. Maharaja Man Singh, the first of Amber, you can see him in the portrait. He was Akbar's trusted general, as well as being his brother-in-law, is believed to have owned the staff, perhaps gifted to him by the emperor himself. Today, the staff is in a private collection, but an early 20th century drawing of the staff by Thomas Holbein Headingley on the right provides detailed inset. It's made up of 33 enamel cylinders that display Indian motifs like the lotus, elephant, peacock, and wild boar. I've shown you one small section of the staff, which is in a private collection. I could not show you all the full staff. Look at the colors. They are bright hues of yellow, bright blue, indigo, all the colors reminiscent of the European palette that we saw earlier. As for its origins of the staff, while some suggest, actually Henley himself has suggested, that it was perhaps made in Lahore or in Amber in Jaipur due to the presence of Lahore craftsmen brought by Maharaja Man Singh I. To me, it is more likely that it was crafted in the Deccan, perhaps in Hyderabad or even in Lucknow. In 1498, the Portuguese landed in India, and by 1510, they had seized Goa. This conquest marked the formal introduction of enamelling to India, as I said. Jewelry-related commerce was an important source of profit for the Portuguese through Goa. In fact, there are frequent references to terms like joias, jewelry, and esmaltada, or enameled, in Portuguese Indian sources. Look at the pendant on top of the child Jesus, crafted in Spain between 1550 and 1600. Such images would have found their way to India and replicated in Goa. And look at the image below. It is Kundan set. The gems are all Kundan set. It's of a female saint from around the same period, this time unmistakably made in India. She wears a distinctive Goan attire, the Pano Baju. Her hairstyle is Indian, even decorated with Indian ornaments, and there's even a bindi on her forehead, all of which combine to confirm its Indian origin. On the right is a makara pendant showcasing religious figures, animals, and mythological creatures, often carrying symbolic or allegorical meanings, were popular in Europe. This particular pendant, however, embodies the makara, an Indian river crocodile that served as a protective talisman for sailors. The piece dates to 1590 to 1600. Where was it made? Was it made in India and then exported to Europe? Or was it made in Europe with Indian influence? A lot of these exchanges were going on at this time. Similarly is this pendant on the screen, which has been attributed to Spanish-Indian manufacture. The figure of the child Jesus, set with rubies in the niche within the frame, is widely believed to have been crafted in Goa, whereas the enameled frame likely originates from Spain or Portugal. So there was an active trade dynamic at this time, with components of jewelry being produced in different regions and assembled elsewhere. We know, for example, that into Goa, particularly sculptures, wood sculptures, the head of the child Jesus or the head of the Christ would alone be brought from Portugal and Spain to Goa, where the wooden body was then manufactured. Another example like that. Now, in this context, images from an illuminated manuscript are particularly fascinating. The pages that you see on the screen are from the jewel book of the Duchess Anna of Bavaria. The book was commissioned by her husband, Duke Albrecht V, in 1552. There are 110 images in the book. They depict both the front and back of each jewel, serving as a pictorial inventory of the jewelry collection owned by the Duke and his wife. It was made by the court artist Hans Meilig. One noticeable piece in the book that struck me is this jade pendant. Its front showcases Kundan set rubies, while its gold back is champlave enameled with floral motifs in green, red, blue, and white. The designs and colors are characteristic of 16th century Indian enamel work. Some scholars believe that the enamel on the pendant might have been a later European addition. However, given the fact that the gemstones are Kundan set in front, the enameling process had to occur before the setting. Subjecting the pendant to the high temperatures of a kiln after placing the gems would cause the delicate enamel, the delicate Kundan, to melt. Such an observation aligns with the Renaissance period's fascination with foreign luxuries and exotic items. They were collected for the Kunstkammers. So I'm sure there was a lot of jewelry and other items being exported from India to Europe. Look at this portrait. Now, I study miniature paintings, especially the jewelry in the paintings, with a very, very powerful magnifying glass, and this is what I came up with. The jewel book of Anna of Bavaria that we spoke about earlier provides a fascinating window into the connections between Renaissance enameling and India. Look at this 17th century painting by Govardhan depicting Shah Jahan seated on the legendary peacock throne. The throne is portrayed in magnificent detail. The pillars are set with emeralds. The body of the throne is inlaid with gemstones. In fact, 20 verses composed by the emperor's favorite poet, Haji Muhammad Qudsi, were actually enameled in green onto the throne's canopy. The texts say that. A standout detail for me in the painting is the pendant. Look at the detail. Suspended from a delicate gold chain on Shah Jahan's chest. The jewel features a central gemstone, blue in color perhaps, flanked by 3 pearls on each side and a pearl below. Upon closer inspection, the blue hue on the scrolls surrounding the main stones is evidently blue enamel. The pendant's design doesn't align with traditional Indian aesthetics, but instead echoes the Renaissance. It might have been crafted in Europe, like, for example, the pendants from the jewel book below, or the example that I have shown above, or perhaps inspired by one of these European designs that was circulating in India at that time. Yet another paint hunting. This painting sheds light on the art of Minakari Enamelling in the Deccan. It is a portrait of Muhammad Adil Shah of Bijapur, dates to around 1645. Now remember, Bijapur is situated a mere 300 kilometers from Goa, but it had historical ties to the city and attracted immigrant artists and boasted a vibrant cultural mix that yielded distinctive architectural and artistic creations. Now, within the portrait, the pendant Muhammad Adil Shah wears is especially intriguing. Historians have described it, and I quote, as a medallion with a rectangular central emerald framed by red stones, possibly spinels. However, closer examination suggests to me that it might actually be surrounded by red enamel petals. The dotted detailing on the gold, and you can see it here, and the gold stippling around the central stone was something that was very common in Europe at that time. And you can see it in the two examples that I have shown here. The white dots, especially within the red petals, suggest enamel and not gemstones. A similar technique appears on the English pendant on the top, which features red enamel scrolls punctuated by distinct white dots. In fact, placing a white dot in the enamel, you can see it on the archery ring in the bottom, became a common device in later Indian pieces. It probably threw the color into relief. And we have actually, for the gallery in Jaipur, recreated the pendant in exactly the same manner in which it might have been manufactured at that time. The influences were therefore really varied. Now look at this painting. Painting meets enameling in this instance. Now in the royal ateliers, as well as in the bazaar, painters regularly collaborated with diverse artisans, including goldsmiths, with architects, with sculptors, and even with weavers. Consequently, the designer, or chitera as he was known, who laid out the motifs to be enameled, was often the miniature artist. Two notable paintings from Bijapur depict scenes that are recurrent in Bijapuri art. The painting on the left portrays Sultan Ibrahim Adil Shah on a hawking expedition, astride a horse set against a verdant landscape with cranes in the background. While the painting on the right portrays a young man resting in an expansive landscape with rugged mountains and a white palace in the distance. Now look at the pendant on the right. I've shown the back first on top and the front below. The pendant is attributed to the Deccan, possibly Bijapur, is captivating in its detail. The oval tablet of nephrite jade is decorated on the front with two birds perched on a branch. But look closely, there are little Chinese clouds over the birds, and you can see the Chinese clouds in the painting. The reverse is painted in a medley of Champlevé and Bastille and painted enamel techniques. It portrays a horseman and a lion in a landscape with palaces and craggy hills. The scene is set above what looks like a river or verdant plains with cranes and ducks. The striking correlation between the paintings and the enameled tableau on the pendant is conspicuous to me. I hope it is to you all. There were multicultural influences. Look at textiles. Minakari in jeweler's parlance means enameling with vitreous paste on gold or silver. The term is also used in the context of textiles. On the screen is a 17th century Mughal patka, or waist sash. The brocade fabric known as Ashavali from Ahmedabad is woven from silk with gold, silver, and colored threads. But the raised or embossed appearance of the floral designs that looks as if they are enameled on the gold bucket is actually known as Minakari among the weavers in textile parlance. Another example. Located southeast of Istanbul, Iznik was the center of pottery production for the Ottoman Empire. Iznik wares were exported to Europe and Asia, where they were sought after luxury items and inspired local artisans. On the top left, the Iznik dish, and look at the one from the Mughal treasury, which is today in the Hermitage collection. They share a common carnation motif, which is almost identical. And on the right is an example of Bidri ware. Bidri traces its origin to Bidar in the Deccan, where it flourished, particularly in the 17th century. Look closely at the Bidri plate and the handle of the sword on the right. They share lotus blossoms surrounded by gently rippling water. In fact, this technique on the gold ground in enamel is known as ab-e-leher, or ripples of water. Multan, a city in the Punjab, was once a thriving hub of trade and commerce. The city was renowned for its glazed cobalt blue, turquoise, and green tiles. You can see two examples on the left. From the 15th to 18th century, globalization led to cultural exchange between regions, exemplified again by these archery rings. Look closely, you can see the poppy motif on the tile on top and the poppy in the center of the archery ring on the right. And if you look below, you can actually see the same bird form in addition to the central poppy flower, which looks almost identical to the poppy represented on the tile. You can even see the concordance in architecture, between architecture and enamel patterns. The marble of the Taj Mahal is enriched with inlaid geometric patterns, drawing from the legacy of Islamic design. Look at the chevron pattern that is featured on the Taj Mahal's columns, echoed in green and white enamel executed in champlavé in this beautiful elbow crutch, once again demonstrating the harmonious interplay between art forms. Now, from its birth in Goa, Minakari gradually moved to different parts of India. During the second half of the 18th century, Hyderabad, Awadh, and Bengal were important Mughal provinces that sought to rival the Mughal court. The declining power of the Mughal Empire resulted in the closure of imperial ateliers and decline in patronage. Master craftsmen, therefore, migrated from the imperial workshops to other centers, such as Hyderabad, Awadh, Bengal, carrying with them their designs, skills, and their expertise. Now, determining the exact place of manufacture of a piece of jewelry with Minakari can be very challenging. While a codified floral imagery often proclaims the place and date of enameled artworks, the vast visual vocabulary of Minakari complicates the task of pinpointing the source of each color, each pattern, and each motif, particularly because not many items have survived. Jewels and jeweled objects have also traveled. They were carried by merchants for sale, by brides as part of their dowries, goldsmiths relocated, and wars resulted in the appropriation of treasuries. The two examples on the screen illustrate this. Both have been attributed to Murshidabad, based primarily on provenance and acquisition records. On the left is a Jigga and Sarpati in the Victoria and Albert Museum. According to the museum records, they were presented to Admiral Charles Watson by Mir Jafar, the Nawab of Bengal, in 1757 following the Battle of Plassey. However, to me, the arrangement of the diamond petals around the large central sapphire in the Jigga is typical of Hyderabad workmanship, and you see it a lot in the Nizam of Hyderabad's jewels. While the single red flower on a white enamel ground, the bottom right, is reminiscent of early Deccan work. Perhaps the jewel was created in the Deccan and entered the Murshidabad treasury through purchase. It could have been made by a goldsmith who had relocated to the Bengal capital. Future research might provide a clearer picture. Similarly, on the right, a pair of bazu buns, also attributed to Murshidabad. But they echo the elegant scroll work in the finest Renaissance pendants that we saw earlier. They are enameled both on the front and the back, very rare occurrence in India. There appears to be a strong European influence in these jewels. Very difficult to say where they were made, perhaps in Goa and transported to Murshidabad, or made in Murshidabad, where Portuguese and European artists were active in this period. By the late 18th century, Jaipur, Benares, Kangra and Kullu in Himachal Pradesh, Kashmir, Multan and Sindh had emerged as prominent enamelling hubs, each boasting its signature palette of colors and motifs. This is Hyderabad, kingdom of the Nizams, where enamel reached new heights in the 18th and 19th centuries. Characteristic features of this center include elegant forms, delicate detailing on the gold. The enamel surface is rarely overcrowded. The emphasis is on floral motifs. The palette is vibrant. The colors are dark. Monochrome green, blue, and white enamel, as you can see in the piece at the bottom and the beautiful necklace on the top right, are all hallmarks of Hyderabad. Lucknow. We left Lucknow when we saw the archery rings. What happened in Lucknow? From the Mughal preference for single flowering plant, usually the poppy, or delicate floral sprays, the exuberant profusion of flowers. There were irises, lilies, poppies, and other flowers manifest in the arts of Lucknow. You see them in metalware, you see it in glassware, in weapons, and of course in jewelry. Blues and greens predominate, and you can again see the same blues and greens that have endured in the art of Lucknow. And Jaipur, with its close proximity to the Mughal court, emerged with an unrivaled artistic vigor in the 19th century. Vibrant red, green, and white are typical of Jaipur. Colors reminiscent of the rubies, emeralds, and diamonds that decorate the front of the piece. It enabled the jeweler to recreate colorful gardens of flowering plants and flower heads in full bloom. And then we have Benares, the painted enamel technique, which is known as Gulabi Meena. What was its source of inspiration? The art of painted enamels reached new heights, as I said earlier, in Limoges in France. From there, the art form spread to Persia and the Isfahan court. You can see the example on the top left. Enameled ware was brought as diplomatic gifts. They were in great demand. And Persian craftsmen in the late Zand and Qajar periods introduced this enamelling style to Sindh, from where it traveled to the royal court of Awadh in the 17th century, and thereon to Benares. An opaque white ground is prepared in the champlavé technique, onto which delicate shades of pink enamel pigment is painted and then fired to fuse the enamel to the right ground. Because of the pink color, the most popular motifs are pink-colored flowers. So lotus is the most predominant, and then we have roses. In the Himachal region, painted and champlavé enamel was on silver, but for earrings and nose ring, it was done on gold, mostly painted enameling. Predominant colors include shades of blue and green with yellow and white. So as we draw to an end, for centuries, Indian artists have drawn inspiration from flora. During 17th century, under the patronage of Jahangir and Shah Jahan, flowers became a dynastic emblem, and they appear in all genres of art, including thrones that were decorated with immense floral imagery. Flowers, both local and foreign, real and imaginary, natural and stylized, hybrid and fantastic, were incorporated into the repertoire of the enameler. The most prominent, of course, which I've been able to identify looking at pieces, is the iris, narcissus, marigolds, poppies, the saffron flower, oleanders, chrysanthemums, tulip, and of course the lotus. Now, enamel, what is enamel? Enamel is actually glass fused to a metal surface at very high temperature. The process is actually both an art and a science. It requires multiple applications and firings to achieve the desired depth of color and translucency that you see on the pieces in the screen. Every color is fired at a different temperature and for different durations, requiring precise scientific knowledge, which our craftsmen are well versed in. Indian enamelers also devised their own beautiful color terminology, and just to give you a few examples, pigeon blood or translucent red, like the one that you see here in this pendant on that piece, was known as khune kabutar. A translucent green compared to the feathers of the parrot were known as tote ka par. And a deep translucent blue like the peacock's neck was known as gardan e tos, and so on. Now, in conclusion, there has been this long debate on the reasons for enamel on the backside of Indian jewels. Given the extent of effort and workmanship expended on the reverse, and especially since it was enjoyed by none by the wearer, some scholars claim that it was to protect the thin sheet of gold from wearing away due to constant contact with the skin. Others have opined that the addition of enamel by excavating hollows reduces the amount of gold. Gold was precious. They were trying to preserve the amount of gold. While the more romantic attributed to the sensual pleasure of a private garden resting on the skin, enveloping the jewel and wearer in moments of pure private joy. However, the practice of enameling the reverse side of jewels was also inherited from the West. During the Renaissance, jewels were decorated on the front and the back. However, with the discovery of the New World and the greater availability of emeralds from Colombia and diamonds from India, which flooded into Europe, sparkling gemstones gained prominence and took center stage on the front, relegating enamel to the reverse. In India, there was an even more practical consideration, as I told you earlier. Jewelers had to refrain from enameling the front, hindered by the soft kundan used for gemstone settings. Kundan is pure 22-karat gold. This left the thicker reverse of the object, the ghat or the mold, ideal for enameling. So, the transfer of the art form of enameling exemplifies the sharing of ideas across cultural boundaries, as well as the transformations and interpretations that occurred within local contexts. This shifting Indian worldview is most evident in the art of Minakari Enamelling, showcasing a dynamic exchange of creativity and inspiration. Thank you all.